sure loves Chevrolet. Got big news to convey. Chevy's new in every way.
They were not just cars, they were rolling works of art, sculpted in steel and chrome, then left behind by a world that stopped valuing beauty. What did we lose when elegance took a backseat to efficiency? The 1957 Chevrolet Bel Air was more than a car. It was a statement. With its glittering chrome accents, towering tail fins, and wide, toothy grille, it captured the soul of 1950s American optimism. Every line felt exaggerated in the best way possible, as if the designers were dreaming in neon. From its sculpted hood bullets to its V-shaped emblem on the trunk, it looked like it belonged in a parade, even when it was parked in a driveway. This was not a car you simply drove. It was a car you arrived in. Available in bold two-tone colors and boasting a jet-inspired dashboard, the Bel Air was flashy without apology. It made teenagers fall in love with driving and gave parents a sense of pride every time they turned the key. Its rear fins, tipped with chrome spears, seemed to aim skyward, echoing America's obsession with space, speed, and style. The Bel Air was both grounded and futuristic, a bridge between eras. Decades later, collectors still chase it, not just for its looks, but for the feeling it brings back. The feeling of jukeboxes, drive-ins, and the open road glowing beneath taillights shaped like rocket flares. The 1963 Chevrolet Corvette Sting-Ray split-window coupe is what happens when a car becomes sculpture. Every curve was carved with intent, from the muscular fenders to the razor-sharp crease down the hood. But it was the split rear window that stole the show. Dividing the back glass with a spine of fiberglass, it gave the car an almost mythical silhouette, like something designed in secret by a team of fighter jet engineers and surfboard artists. It looked fast standing still, low to the ground with a poised, animal-like stance. Underneath that beauty was power. A small block V8 ready to launch. The dual exhausts sang a tune every gearhead still knows by heart. Inside, the cockpit felt like a jet. Round dials, bucket seats, and a dashboard that wrapped around you like armor. But the split window, as striking as it was, proved controversial. It restricted rear visibility, and by 1964, it was gone. Just 1 year, one design, one legendary moment in automotive design history. Today, that one-year-only coupe is among the most sought-after Corvettes ever built. Not just because of its rarity, but because it dares to ask, what if cars could be both machines and masterpieces? The 1955 Ford Thunderbird was Ford's glamorous answer to European roadsters, but with an unmistakably American attitude. It had a low-slung body, round taillights, and a wide grille that grinned like it had nothing to prove. Where other cars tried to scream, the Thunderbird purred. Its proportions were just right: long hood, short deck, and curves in all the right places. It came with a removable fiberglass hardtop that looked like it had been styled by a Hollywood set designer, complete with those signature porthole windows introduced the following year. Inside, it was a personal cockpit, padded in leather and chrome with simple round dials and a steering wheel that looked like a work of art. The Thunderbird was never about brute force. It was about charm, about elegance. It cruised rather than raced, preferring a coastal drive to a drag strip. And that was its magic. It offered American buyers a taste of luxury, freedom, and flair at a time when the country was hitting its cultural stride. The 1955 Thunderbird became an icon almost instantly, not because it was the loudest car on the road, but because it whispered sophistication with every mile. The 1959 Cadillac Eldorado was not just a car, it was a spectacle on wheels. It had tail fins that reached toward the sky, sweeping backward like wings ready for liftoff. At the end of each fin sat bullet-shaped tail lights, glowing like afterburners. The chrome dripped off the body in every direction, gleaming from the massive front grille, the trim, the mirrors, even the door handles. Inside, it was more like a lounge than a vehicle. Plush seats, bright colors, and enough polished metal to blind you at sunset. The dashboard stretched wide, filled with buttons and dials that felt like airplane controls. It was long, it was loud, it was unapologetically American. Designed during the height of the jet age, the 1959 Eldorado was Cadillac's boldest vision of what luxury and modernity looked like. But under all that shine was serious engineering. A V8 engine gave it power to match the spectacle. It rode smooth, glided even. Driving it was not about getting somewhere. It was about being seen. And seen you were. Pulling up in a 1959 Eldorado felt like stepping onto a red carpet. It was everything big, bold, and beautiful about the post-war dream, on 4 gleaming white-wall tires. The 1932 Ford Model B Coupe, lovingly nicknamed the Deuce Coupe, may have started as an honest workhorse, but it became the heart of hot rod culture. Its simple, boxy shape made it the perfect canvas for teenage gearheads in the 1940s and 1950s who stripped it down, souped it up, and turned it into something wild. The body was made of steel. The lines were clean. The front grille looked like a chrome shield, and with the right stance, chopped roof, lowered suspension, big wheels in the back, it looked downright mean. But even in stock form, the Model B Coupe had a quiet dignity. It was the first Ford with a 4-cylinder and V8 option, giving drivers a real choice in performance. Its proportions were near perfect, compact, balanced, and tough-looking. No car better captured the do-it-yourself spirit of post-war America. The Deuce Coupe was more than metal. It was identity. The Beach Boys sang about it. Young men built their reputations on how theirs looked and how fast it ran. Some were painted wild colors, others left in raw primer. But they all shared one thing: soul. Even today, spotting one feels like shaking hands with history. The 1967 Pontiac GTO was the kind of car that made your heart race before your foot even touched the gas pedal. With its wide stance, stacked headlights, and sleek hood scoops, it carried the kind of muscular elegance that turned a street into a runway. It was bold without being loud, aggressive without being crude. The body had just enough curve to catch the light and just enough edge to make you stare. This was the peak of Pontiac's design language. Every line meant something. Under the hood, it was no slouch. A powerful V8 engine delivered the growl to back up the look, launching drivers down the quarter mile and into legend. But what made the GTO special was its dual personality. It was as comfortable rolling through a small-town parade as it was at a midnight streetlight showdown. Inside, the bucket seats hugged you. The wood-grain dash, the rally gauges, the heavy steering wheel, they all reminded you that you were in something serious. The 1967 model marked the last of the first generation, and many consider it the most refined version. Not just a muscle car, but a masterpiece of proportion, presence, and pure Pontiac pride. The 1948 Tucker 48, also known as the Tucker Torpedo, looked like it came from a future we never quite reached. Its sleek teardrop body was decades ahead of its time, with curves that flowed like water and a center-mounted third headlight that turned with the steering wheel. Just standing next to it felt like being part of a science fiction story. Built by visionary Preston Tucker, this car was not just beautiful, it was revolutionary. It had a rear-mounted engine, pop-out safety windshields, and a padded dashboard, all in an era when most cars were still slabs of metal with wheels. But the most striking thing was how it looked. Low, long, and impossibly smooth, the Tucker 48 made every other car on the road seem outdated. Only 51 were ever built before the company was crushed by financial scandal and corporate resistance. But those 51 cars? They became legends. Not because of what they were, but because of what they could have been. The Tucker was beauty wrapped in bravery, a symbol of ambition that flew too close to the sun. And for collectors and dreamers alike, it still represents one of the boldest, most beautiful what-ifs in automotive history. The 1970 Chevrolet Chevelle SS 454 was not built to whisper, it was built to roar. With its broad shoulders, twin racing stripes, and domed hood, it looked like it had just launched out of a drag strip, even while parked. The lines were clean, muscular, and full of tension, like a predator caught mid-stride. But it was not just about looks. Under that hood sat the legendary 454 cubic inch V8, producing enough raw horsepower to rattle the pavement and your spine. It was one of the most powerful engines ever dropped into a factory muscle car, and yet it never looked over-designed. The Chevelle's beauty came from balance, brutal performance wrapped in understated style. Chrome accents added just the right sparkle, while the blackout grille gave it attitude. Inside, it was business first. Bucket seats, a horseshoe shifter, and a dash full of gauges that reminded you this was no Sunday cruiser. The 1970 Chevelle SS was peak muscle, but it wore that power with confidence, not flash. It was the kind of car you respected from a distance and fell in love with up close. A brawler in a tailored suit. The 1969 Dodge Charger RT was Detroit's idea of a muscle car with movie star looks. Its long, lean, fastback roofline flowed into the sculpted rear like a wave frozen mid-crest. The front grille, hidden behind flip-up doors, looked like a sneer. It was the kind of car that made traffic stop just to let it pass. From the bold body contours to the Coke bottle curves along its sides, everything about it said speed. And it delivered. The RT badge meant it came with serious power, often a 426 Hemi under the hood, rumbling like distant thunder. But the Charger was more than just a drag strip demon. It had presence, charisma. It showed up on television and movie screens and instantly became iconic. Whether it was leaping over hills in car chases or rumbling through small-town streets, the Charger had an unmistakable aura. Inside, it was all muscle, tight cockpit, rally-style dash, and heavy doors that shut with a satisfying thunk. The 1969 model, in particular, captured everything Dodge did right: beauty, brawn, and a little bit of rebellion built into every inch of its steel. The 1956 Lincoln Continental Mark II was not about flash. It was about refinement, the kind that spoke in hushed tones and polished details. With a long hood, subtle tail fins, and a roofline that seemed to float, it exuded grace from every angle. No wild curves, no loud stripes, just smooth surfaces, tight panel gaps, and the kind of craftsmanship more often found in European Grand Tourers. Lincoln wanted to build the best car in the world, and in many ways, they did. The Mark II was priced higher than a Rolls-Royce at the time, but it justified every dollar with hand-built attention. The paint was polished to a mirror. The interior was stitched in fine leather and accented with real chrome and brushed metal. It did not shout for attention. It expected to be noticed quietly. And it was. Celebrities drove it, business moguls ordered it, and even President Eisenhower was photographed stepping out of one. The 1956 Mark II was not just a car, it was an experience. A deliberate, understated American kind of beauty that never had to raise its voice to be heard. The 1961 Chrysler 300G was not shy. It was bold, sculpted, and dressed like it was heading to the opera with a switchblade in its pocket. From its towering tail fins to its wide, low grille, this car screamed performance wrapped in a tuxedo. The front end looked like a roaring animal ready to pounce. Twin headlights sat dramatically at angles, and the inward-sloping grille gave it a sneer no other car dared imitate. Around back, the fins soared upward in sweeping arcs, cradling the taillights like jewels. And the inside? It was just as extravagant: leather bucket seats, aircraft-style gauges, and a dashboard shaped like a rocket's cockpit. The 300G was part muscle, part luxury, and all attitude. Under the hood, a 413 cubic inch V8 delivered thunderous performance. It was not just fast, it was furious. Only a few thousand were made, making it rare then and legendary now. It stood apart from the crowd and wore its uniqueness like a badge of honor. In a world of soft curves and quiet lines, the Chrysler 300G was the car that walked in wearing red. The 1936 Auburn 852 Boattail Speedster looked like something out of a dream, or a Gatsby fantasy brought to life. With a tapered rear that mimicked a wooden speedboat, it earned the name Boattail and wore it proudly. Every inch of this car was designed to turn heads and defy convention. The long hood stretched forward like a runway. The chrome grille stood tall, flanked by giant gleaming headlights. The flowing fenders curled over white-wall tires like silk draped across the wheels. It was not just Art Deco, it was art. The dashboard shimmered with turned aluminum. The gauges sparkled. And the ride? As smooth as jazz. Underneath all that style was a supercharged straight-eight engine, giving it the speed to match its name. It was built to perform, and it did, hitting speeds over 100 miles per hour when most cars were lucky to hit 60. But it was not just the numbers. It was the way the Auburn carried itself. It looked fast, standing still. It looked expensive, even when parked next to the finest luxury cars of its day. And now, nearly a century later, it still has the power to stop you in your tracks. The 1953 Buick Skylark was the kind of car you did not just drive, you admired. Created to celebrate Buick's 50th anniversary, this limited production convertible took the idea of style and pushed it to the edge. The body was lower, longer, and more sculpted than anything else on the road. It had swooping lines, razor-sharp chrome accents, and wheel wells cut dramatically into the fenders. The rear quarters flared out with a confident curve, giving the car a broad, commanding presence. It wore its white-wall tires like cufflinks. And the details? Pure class. From the wire wheels to the wraparound windshield, the Skylark felt like a custom build for a movie star. Inside, it was every bit as glamorous. Two-tone leather, chrome trim, and dash switches that looked like jewelry. Only 1,690 were made, making it as rare as it was beautiful. Beneath the hood, a V8 gave it the power to back up its looks. But truthfully, the Skylark was not about racing. It was about presence. It was about the feeling of top-down cruising on a summer night, the sun setting, and the chrome catching every last ray. The 1971 Plymouth Cuda convertible did not whisper. It growled, snarled, and screamed its presence with every line and panel. This was not just a muscle car, it was an animal wrapped in sheet metal. With a low stance, bold stripes, and that aggressive shaker hood popping through the center, it looked like it was chewing its way out of the asphalt. Every curve had purpose, every vent was functional. The front end, with its quad headlights and mean grille, dared anyone to step aside. The convertible version was especially rare, with only a few hundred produced, making it one of the most sought-after Mopars of all time. Under the hood, you could find a range of monstrous V8 engines, none more feared than the 426 Hemi. Inside, the cockpit was driver-focused, with high-back bucket seats and rally gauges that made you feel like you were prepping for launch. It was brutal, beautiful, and unapologetically loud. Even at a standstill, it flexed muscle from every angle. And today, seeing one on the road feels like spotting a myth. Rare, wild, and unforgettable. The 1949 Mercury 8 Coupe was the car that turned steel into swagger. It had low-slung curves, heavy chrome, and a long body that glided like smoke on pavement. The roofline flowed like a wave, and the fenders hugged the wheels like tailored fabric. This was the car that customizers dreamed of. Chop the top, slam the suspension, French the headlights, and you had the ultimate lead sled. But even in stock form, the Mercury 8 had a presence that could not be denied. Its grille looked like a sneer. The rounded rear fenders gave it a sultry, sculpted look. James Dean drove one in Rebel Without a Cause, cementing its place in American pop culture forever. It was not about high speed. It was about cool. The kind of cool that could not be taught. Inside, it was just as smooth. Bench seats, chrome knobs, and a steering wheel the size of a dinner plate. You sank into it like an old friend. The Mercury 8 was not flashy. It was confident. It did not beg for attention. It got it anyway. The 1966 Ford Mustang Fastback was the kind of car that made teenagers dream, made adults jealous, and made everyone else want to follow it home. With its long hood, short deck, and that signature fastback roofline sloping down into a tight rear end, it looked fast before it ever moved. The design was all motion, clean lines, wide stance, and a nose that seemed to lean into the wind. The fastback variant, in particular, gave the Mustang its racing soul. It was not just pretty, it was purposeful. The rear window was nearly horizontal, and the vents on the rear pillars added a touch of jet-age aggression. Inside, it was just as iconic. A twin-pod dash, bucket seats, and a deep-dish steering wheel that begged for a long stretch of highway. The Mustang was not the first muscle car, but it was the one that started the revolution. It was affordable, stylish, and packed with personality. And in fastback form, it felt like you were piloting a rocket made of chrome and steel. It became a symbol of freedom, and for many, their first taste of independence came behind its wheel. The 1963 Buick Riviera was sharp enough to cut glass and smooth enough to melt into the night. It was not loud or brash. It was pure confidence in steel form. Designed to rival the best from Europe, it brought American swagger to the world of personal luxury coupes. The body lines were clean, angular, and deliberate, with a kind of precision that whispered instead of shouted. It did not rely on fins or flair. It relied on restraint. The hidden headlights were tucked away behind clamshell doors that opened like eyelids when the engine roared to life. The grille was low and wide, with a mesh pattern that looked both elegant and predatory. The roofline floated gently above the body, separated by slim pillars that gave it a light, almost delicate look. It was a masterclass in proportion, but underneath, it was all power. A 425 Wildcat V8 sat under the hood, giving the Riviera performance to match its poised appearance. Acceleration was smooth but firm. It was quick but never hurried. Inside, it was quiet elegance. Real wood, tasteful chrome, and a dash layout that felt more private jet than family car. Everything felt intentional. The Riviera did not demand attention. It earned it. One glance was all it took to know this was not your average car. It was a gentleman's muscle car, dressed in a tailored suit and ready for a midnight drive, perfectly balanced between menace and grace. The 1951 Hudson Hornet was a shark in a sea of minnows. With its low-slung step-down design, it hugged the road like nothing else of its time. The floor pans sat inside the frame rails instead of on top of them, giving the car a lower center of gravity and a look that was both sleek and menacing. It had a profile like no other, gliding across pavement with an elegance that masked its aggressive roots. Its rounded front end and wraparound fenders gave it a fluid, aerodynamic shape. This was not just styling, it was strategy. The Hudson Hornet dominated early stock car racing, humbling bigger, flashier cars on the track. Its inline-six engine, known as the Twin H Power, delivered quiet but lethal speed. And because it sat so low, it handled corners like a dream. This was a time when muscle did not always come with flash. But even off the track, it turned heads. The chrome accents were tasteful, the grille was wide and confident, and the proportions were perfect. It looked grounded, muscular, and unmistakably modern. Inside, it felt plush and inviting, with soft seats and wide door panels that made every ride feel like a special occasion. The dashboard was practical, but never plain. The Hudson Hornet may not have lasted forever, but its influence did. It proved that performance and beauty could exist in the same breath, and it did so with a quiet confidence that still echoes today. The 1944 Deluxe Coupe was beauty carved in steel before the war changed everything. With its teardrop headlights, waterfall grille, and long flowing fenders, it was the last great design of the pre-war era, and maybe the most beloved. It had a kind of simple elegance you could only find in that moment between decades. The hood narrowed like a prow, while the coupe's profile sloped gently into a rounded trunk. It looked fast without trying. It looked proud without shouting. Customizers would later turn it into a hot rod staple, but in stock form, it already had the bones of greatness. Under the hood was a flathead V8 that purred with mechanical honesty. It was reliable, it was smooth, and it gave the car a strong, confident stride. Inside, the cabin was clean and symmetrical, with Art Deco gauges and a big banjo steering wheel. It was a driver's car, a cruiser, a favorite for everyone from farmers to GIs coming home from war. The 1940 Ford Coupe was not just another car. It was a symbol of an era, a moment before everything changed, preserved forever in polished chrome. The 1970 Oldsmobile 442W30 was the kind of car that slipped under the radar until it roared past you in a blur of stripes and thunder. With bold muscular lines and a low planted stance, it was a sleeper only to the untrained eye. The front end was all business, quad headlights flanking a wide grille with a subtle but menacing hood scoop hinting at the power beneath. The W30 package was not just a badge, it was a beast. Under the hood lived a 455 cubic inch V8, tuned for raw acceleration and torque you could feel in your chest. But it was not just fast, it was refined. The 442 had a kind of restrained aggression. Power without the screaming decals, beauty without the vanity. The side profile was tight and purposeful, with just the right amount of chrome and a rake that gave it attitude. Inside, it felt like a gentleman's racer. Bucket seats, a floor-mounted shifter, and gauges that spoke only when spoken to. The 1970 W30 was one of the finest expressions of American muscle. Brutal, yes, but dignified. It did not need to shout. It only needed to move. The 1955 Chrysler C300 looked like power dressed in a tuxedo. It was big, low, and clean. No fins, no excess, no gimmicks. Just pure, understated aggression wrapped in tasteful chrome. The front end featured a bold egg crate grille framed by round headlights and a hood that arched with the quiet authority of a heavyweight's brow. The body was smooth, almost muscular in how it flowed from front to rear. The proportions were spot on, long, wide, commanding, yet never bloated. Chrysler called it the banker's hot rod, and it was not just a slogan. It was the first production car in America to deliver 300 horsepower straight off the showroom floor, thanks to a massive Hemi-Fi 8 engine that rumbled like distant thunder. It moved like a locomotive in silk gloves. But what made the C300 so unforgettable was its balance of speed and sophistication. It never had to scream to prove it belonged. It knew. Inside, the cabin felt tailored, rich leather, thick carpeting, polished metal, and gauges laid out like the controls of a luxury jet. Every detail was dialed in with purpose. It was the car for someone who wanted muscle but refused to give up refinement. The 1955 C300 was not just the start of Chrysler's iconic letter series, it was the blueprint for American luxury performance. It showed that a car could be fast, fierce, and still carry itself with quiet confidence. The 1960 Chevrolet Corvette C1 was the last of its kind, and the most refined version of a legend in the making. With its dual headlights perched at the edges of the fenders and a long, curving hood that flowed into a tight cabin, it had a look that was all elegance and energy. The fiberglass body shimmered under the sun, shaped not just for speed, but for attention. Every scoop, every contour, every piece of chrome seemed placed by an artist's hand. The grille smiled wide, but the car's stance said it meant business. Inside, it was snug and focused, just enough space for you, the wheel, and the open road. It felt intimate without being cramped. The small block V8 delivered a smooth, confident pull, and the ride was tight but forgiving. The 1960 model was a bridge between the rawness of the early Corvettes and the sharper muscle of what was to come. It was America's sports car growing up, still playful, still gorgeous, but beginning to understand its power. Today, it remains one of the most beloved versions of the C1, a car that captured both the innocence and ambition of its era. The 1931 Cadillac FIS-16 Roadster was a monument on wheels, a rolling sculpture of chrome, leather, and unmatched presence. With its impossibly long hood, narrow windshield, and elegant sweeping fenders, it looked more like a bespoke yacht than a car. The proportions were grand, yet graceful. Coach-built by some of the finest designers of the day, no two were exactly alike, but each one shared the same soul. A 16-cylinder engine so smooth it whispered rather than roared. The grille was tall and regal, the headlights large and jewel-like, and the wire wheels laced with white-wall perfection. From the running boards to the leather-wrapped interior, every inch was handcrafted. It was the kind of car that only royalty, moguls, or film stars could afford, an object of desire in the darkest days of the Depression. Driving one was an event. Riding in one was a declaration. The Cadillac F-16 was not just about wealth. It was about taste, precision, and scale. It remains one of the most beautiful and significant American cars ever made. And even today, almost a century later, its silhouette can still silence a room. The 1971 Buick GSX Stage 1 was the kind of muscle car that wore a tie to the fight and still knocked you out in the first round. Buick had a reputation for smooth, luxurious rides, cars built for long cruises and quiet comfort. But the GSX flipped that script without tearing it up. Under the hood sat the Stage 1 455 cubic inch V8, a torque-heavy powerhouse that quietly outperformed some of the loudest names in the game. With well over 500 pound-feet of torque, it could flatten your spine at a stoplight. Yet it did all this without screaming for attention. The GSX came in two standout colors, Saturn Yellow and Apollo White, both with bold racing stripes, rear spoilers, and blacked-out grills. It looked sharp, not showy. Inside, it was all Buick. Soft bucket seats, full instrumentation, and just enough wood trim to remind you that you were not in a stripped-down street racer. But when you dropped the hammer, everything changed. It was fast, refined, and completely intimidating when it needed to be. The GSX Stage 1 did not need gimmicks. It was a high-class assassin on wheels. Today, it is remembered as one of the most underrated muscle cars of the era. It proved that luxury and performance were not opposites, and that a little elegance could still tear up the pavement when the time was right. Sometimes the real threat is the one that stays quiet until you are already in the rear view. The Chevrolet Vega rolled out with bold dreams. It was meant to be a compact car for a new era, lightweight, efficient, stylish. And it had one headline feature, an aluminum engine that was supposed to revolutionize small car performance. But that engine turned out to be its undoing. It overheated, it warped, it failed. For many drivers, the Vega started as a promise and ended as a cautionary tale. Kids in the back seat might remember the smell of coolant more than the family vacations. Underneath its slick styling, the Vega simply was not built to last. Rust showed up like an uninvited guest. Head gaskets blew out without warning. What was supposed to be GM's forward-thinking marvel became a repair shop regular. Still, if you grew up in the 1970s, chances are you saw plenty of them on the road because they sold fast. Everyone knew someone who had a Vega, maybe your neighbor, maybe your uncle, maybe your dad, and no matter how badly it ran, it was part of your daily backdrop, parked at the curb, rattling down the road, or waiting in line at the drive-thru. The Vega was not just a car, it was a flawed dream on four wheels. The 1981 DeLorean DMC-12 looked like it drove straight out of a science fiction film, and in some ways, it did. Its stainless steel body and gull-wing doors made it instantly iconic, turning heads even while parked. But under the surface, it was a troubled machine, underpowered, overpriced, difficult to manufacture. The Peugeot Renault Volvo V6 engine made just over 100 horsepower, laughable for a sports car. Quality control was a nightmare, and early models were plagued with electrical gremlins, loose panels, and poorly fitted parts. Door seals leaked, dashboards warped. Then came the scandal. Company founder John DeLorean was arrested in a cocaine sting operation, and suddenly the car's futuristic gleam turned into tabloid fodder. Production halted, and the dream unraveled. Despite its later fame in pop culture, the DMC-12 was a commercial disaster. It failed to meet its lofty goals and left behind a warehouse of unsold ambition. Today, people remember the car more for its movie legacy than its actual performance on the road. It is a symbol of vision, failure, and what happens when style moves faster than substance. The 1970 Dodge Coronet RT looked like a brawler, and it acted like one too. With its split grille that resembled a set of flared nostrils, it had one of the most aggressive faces of any car from the muscle era. This was not a car trying to charm you, it was daring you to challenge it. And under the hood, it had the muscle to back up that attitude. Most came with the 440 Magnum, but for those who wanted to push it, the mighty 426 Hemi was also an option. Either way, the Coronet RT was a straight-line menace. It was built for speed, with quarter-mile domination in its DNA. But what really made it stand out was its combination of menace and simplicity. No gimmicks, no cartoons, just a bold, brash machine that meant business. Inside, it was all muscle, basic gauges, tough materials, and a shifter ready for action. The Coronet RT may not have had the glamour of a Charger or the cult following of a Challenger, but it had respect. Lots of it. Today, it is a rare sight, but one that still turns heads and raises eyebrows, because real muscle does not need to be pretty, it just needs to hit hard. The Volkswagen Super Beetle was small, but its presence was huge. You could spot it from a block away with its unmistakable round shape, bug-eyed headlights, and humming engine that sounded like nothing else. This was not just a car. It was a movement. Kids decorated them with peace signs, daisy stickers, and rainbow paint. Hippies loved them. College kids trusted them, and parents bought them because they just kept going. The Super Beetle was a little more refined than its earlier cousins. Longer front end, upgraded suspension, more space inside. But it still had the same charm. The clunky engine in the rear, the flimsy heat that never worked right, the glove compartment that always squeaked, and somehow that just made you love it more. You learned to drive stick in one. You fit 5 friends into one and still had room for a guitar. It was easy to fix, easy to park, and impossible to hate. It was not fast, it was not flashy, but it was faithful. The Super Beetle was the underdog you rooted for. It kept going when others broke down. And if you grew up in the 1970s, it probably carried your first memories of freedom, laughter, and long winding roads. The 1981 AMC Eagle SX/4 was one of those rare ideas that arrived before the world was ready. It was a compact 2-door with 4-wheel drive, blending off-road ruggedness with urban practicality. In theory, it was brilliant. In execution, it was flawed. AMC struggled with quality control, and the Eagle SX/4 suffered from awkward handling, creaky interiors, and a drivetrain that felt more tractor than car. The design was boxy, and the cabin felt cramped. Yet underneath it all, there was real innovation, just buried under years of corporate dysfunction and cost-cutting. AMC was already on its last legs, and the Eagle could not save it. Drivers who owned one often appreciated its grit, but they also endured its breakdowns and quirks. Eventually, Subaru and other brands perfected the all-wheel drive formula. The Eagle was just a prototype for a future it would never see. The 1971 Plymouth Roadrunner with the 446-barrel setup was a cartoon come to life, with claws. Everyone remembers the beep-beep horn, the playful badging, and the Looney Tunes reference. But behind the laughs was a serious machine that packed a punch. With a trio of 2-barrel carburetors feeding the massive 440 cubic inch V8, this version of the Roadrunner had the kind of instant, pavement-tearing power that made your stomach drop. It was bare bones, loud, and proud. Everything about it screamed fun, but the kind of fun that left rubber burned into the road. The styling was sharp for '71, new body lines, a menacing grille, and that unmistakable air grabber hood. Inside, it was Spartan, because luxury was not the point. This car was about sound, speed, and simplicity. It had a joy to it, like it wanted to be driven hard and rewarded those who did. The Roadrunner was the muscle car that did not take itself too seriously, and that is why people loved it. Today, it is remembered as a car that brought a grin to your face and a growl to your ears, delivering horsepower with humor. The original Honda Civic showed up quietly, but it changed everything. Small, boxy, and strangely charming, it was Japan's answer to rising gas prices and bulky American land yachts. It did not roar. It buzzed. But that buzz became the soundtrack of a new kind of driver. The Civic was cheap to buy, cheap to fill, and cheap to fix, and that made it a revelation. For teenagers, it was the first taste of independence. For families, it was the backup car that always seemed to run. It was not glamorous. It did not come with wood paneling or shag carpet, but it had personality. The seats were thin, the air conditioning was weak, but it got the job done. And more than that, it started a revolution. This was the beginning of the import wave. People realized they did not need something big to go far, and the Civic proved it. It darted through traffic. It laughed at gas stations. It made you think twice about what a car could be. You probably knew someone who had one, and if you were lucky, you were the one behind the wheel. The 1987 Cadillac Alante was a high-stakes gamble meant to take on the world's best luxury roadsters. Designed in Italy by Pininfarina and airshipped to the United States for final assembly, the Alante had the pedigree, the style, and the marketing budget of a superstar. But what it did not have was execution. Under the hood, it ran on a front-wheel drive Cadillac platform and was powered by an engine that could not match the car's price tag or visual promise. The ride was stiff, the electronics were unreliable, and the digital dashboard was ahead of its time in all the wrong ways. It was not just overpriced, it was outgunned. For the same money, buyers could get a Mercedes-Benz SL with proven reliability and rear-wheel performance. Cadillac tried to sell the Alante as a fusion of European style and American comfort, but what buyers got was an awkward hybrid that was neither comfortable enough nor sporty enough. Sales were sluggish, repairs were costly, and every attempt to revise or improve the model came too late. In the end, the Alante became a luxury car that chased a dream but never caught it. It was supposed to put Cadillac back on the map. Instead, it became a dot on the side of the road. The 1973 Pontiac Firebird Trans Am S D455 was a final roar before the silence. By the early 1970s, emissions rules, fuel prices, and insurance rates were all tightening the noose around muscle cars. But Pontiac pushed back. Hard. The Super Duty 455 engine was a masterpiece, hand-assembled, high compression, and packed with race-ready components. It was the most powerful engine of its time, hidden under the screaming chicken decal and aggressive bodywork. The Trans Am was still loud, still fast, still fighting. It had all the style, wheel flares, shaker hood, rear spoiler, and the strength to back it up. This was not a car built for compromise. It was built as a final statement, one last stand for raw American horsepower before the curtain dropped. Drivers who got their hands on one knew they were holding a piece of history even then. And today, it is seen as one of the last true muscle cars of the golden era. The SD455 was not just an engine. It was a farewell letter written in burnt rubber and roaring exhaust. The Dodge Tradesman. Van was not just a van, it was a canvas. It rolled off the lot as a blank box, and what happened next was entirely up to you. Shag carpet interiors, crushed velvet, bubble windows, diamond-shaped portholes, beds in the back, wood-paneled walls, lava lamps bolted to the ceiling. It was a van, sure, but it was also a den, a clubhouse, a moving apartment on wheels. This was the height of custom van culture in the 1970s. You painted flames on the sides, or wizards, or half-naked warriors fighting dragons. You parked it at the beach and opened the doors to let in the music. Teenagers saw freedom. Adults saw headaches. But either way, the Tradesman became a symbol of expression and rebellion. No two were alike. Some had 8 tracks, CB radios, and tiny refrigerators. Some had blackout curtains for privacy or mystery. You might not remember where you were going, but you remembered how it felt to ride in one. It was soft, loud, and a little bit dangerous. The Tradesman van was a fortress of personality built by its driver, shaped by its passengers. And whether it was parked in a lot or flying down the freeway, it always drew eyes. You didn't just drive it, you lived in it. The 1985 Yugo GF made headlines as the cheapest new car in America. But cheap came with a price, and the Yugo paid dearly. Built in the former Yugoslavia and imported with bold promises, it was meant to give cost-conscious buyers an entry into car ownership. But almost everything about the Yugo felt like a compromise too far. The engine was noisy, the transmission clunky, and interior trim came loose with the slightest touch. Reviewers described it as toy-like, unstable, and barely roadworthy. On the highway, it struggled to keep up. On hills, it begged for mercy. Repairs were frequent and frustrating, and many new owners regretted the purchase before their first oil change. It became a late-night comedy punchline and the butt of every bad car joke for decades. Some cars fade into obscurity. The Yugo earned infamy. It proved that cutting costs without care leads to one destination: failure. The 1970 Ford Mustang Boss 302 was a race car in disguise. Built to qualify for Trans-American racing, it had to follow strict engine size rules. But that did not stop Ford from turning it into a legend. With its high-revving 302 cubic inch V8 and close-ratio 4-speed gearbox, the Boss 302 was built to scream. It was not the fastest in a straight line, but that was not the point. It was all about handling, quick corners, tight turns, track precision in a street-ready package. The Boss 302 had a unique look too. Blacked-out hood, bold stripes, rear window slats, and a front chin spoiler that made it look fast just standing still. Inside, it was all business. No frills, just function. It was made for the road, but born for the circuit. And while the Mustang had plenty of wild variations over the years, the Boss 302 stood out as the one that proved muscle could be smart. It was power with discipline, noise with control. Today, it remains one of the most beloved Mustangs ever built, a reminder that true performance does not always come from brute force alone. The 1984 Ford EXP was supposed to be a sporty two-seater version of the Ford Escort, a compact car reimagined for young drivers looking for flair. But the EXP ended up with none of the performance and even less personality. The engine was weak, especially compared to the Sportier coupes coming out of Japan at the time. The handling was sluggish, the steering vague, and the road feel uninspired. For a car marketed as bold and different, it looked oddly dull. Ford tried hard to pitch it as a fun commuter car, sleek, affordable, and modern. But in reality, it felt more like a lonely Escort missing its back seat. It lacked excitement. It lacked buzz. Even the advertising could not figure out what the EXP was trying to be. Some versions added a turbo, but it was too little, too late. Consumers shrugged, sales tanked, and just a few years later, the model disappeared with barely a whisper. Even among Ford enthusiasts, the EXP has no cult following. The EXP was not a disaster because it did something wrong. It was a disaster because it never did anything right. It promised a thrill and delivered a yawn. The 1970 Dodge Challenger RT was built to make a statement, and it did so with every inch of its wide, aggressive stance. It was long, low, and mean. The kind of car that filled up a parking space like it owned the whole lot. What made the RT special was not just the way it looked, it was the way it moved. With an optional 4406 pack under the hood, this car packed serious heat. That setup meant 3 two-barrel carburetors working together to turn fuel into fury. And the result? Tire-melting acceleration and a deep rolling thunder that echoed down the block. The Challenger offered more than just straight-line speed, though. Inside, it was plush and roomy, with options galore: bucket seats, rally gauges, a pistol grip shifter. It felt like luxury until you floored it. Then it felt like war. In high school parking lots, this was the dream car. Posters on walls, drawings in notebooks. A Challenger RT meant you were somebody. Even now, decades later, that feeling has not faded. If anything, it has grown, because they do not make muscle like this anymore. They just do not. The Datsun 240Z was the first time a lot of Americans realized Japan could build a real sports car. Sleek, low-slung, and surprisingly affordable, it looked like it belonged in Europe. but it cost a fraction of the price. That was the magic. It gave you the styling of a Ferrari, the reliability of a Datsun, and a driving experience that punched way above its weight. It had a straight-six engine, rear-wheel drive, and a gearbox that made you feel like a hero with every shift. And the best part? It actually worked. No electrical gremlins, no leaky carbs, just clean, confident power in a lightweight body. You could carve corners in it, you could drive it to work, you could take it on road trips, and you always got a second look at the gas station. The 240Z sold like crazy because it delivered on everything it promised. For a generation that was growing tired of bulky American coupes, it was a breath of fresh air. The import wave had arrived, and it was wearing a Datsun badge. The 1983 Lincoln Continental Mark VI diesel was an answer to a question nobody asked. During the early 1980s oil crunch, Lincoln decided to offer a diesel version of its full-size luxury coupe. The result was predictably bizarre. Under the hood was a 5.7-liter V8 diesel borrowed from General Motors, and it sounded like a farm truck. Loud, slow, and unrefined. The acceleration was glacial. The engine shook the whole chassis, and the typical Lincoln smoothness was replaced with diesel rattle and hesitation. Worse, the engine itself was unreliable. Head gasket failures, cold start issues, poor longevity. Buyers expecting serene luxury were handed a car that felt like it belonged in a tractor pull. Inside, the plush velour seats and wood grain trim clashed with the constant growl of the diesel clatter. Fuel economy was only marginally better than a gas V8, and the performance sacrifice made it hard to justify. The diesel Mark VI was a novelty, and not a good one. It was dropped quietly, almost as if Lincoln hoped everyone would forget it ever existed. And for the most part, they did. It was not just a bad car, it was a bad idea. The 1970 AMC Rebel machine was a shout in a room full of whispers. It did not just enter the muscle car scene, it kicked down the door and demanded attention. Drenched in patriotic red, white, and blue paint straight from the factory, it looked like a flag on four wheels. But it was more than just loud colors. Under that bulging hood scoop lived a 390 cubic inch V8 that pushed over 300 horsepower. And this car used every ounce of it. Designed for street dominance and track performance, the Rebel machine delivered acceleration that made even the biggest names nervous. It could run the quarter mile in under 14 seconds and looked proud doing it. The styling was bold and aggressive, with unique graphics and details that made it impossible to mistake for anything else. Inside, it was straightforward and functional, just what you wanted from a true muscle car. It did not pretend to be a luxury cruiser. It was all about performance and presence. The Rebel machine proved that AMC could build a serious contender, and it earned the respect of drivers who knew real muscle when they saw it. Today, it is celebrated as a rare and fearless piece of muscle car history, the underdog that never backed down, a car that wore its identity proudly and punched far above its weight. When it comes to bold statements, the Rebel machine was never afraid to speak the loudest. The Chevrolet Caprice Classic was everywhere, and for good reason. It was big, boxy, and built like a brick wall. You saw it on police chases in every television show. You saw it outside the grocery store. You saw it in your own driveway. It was a car that served everyone, from cops to cabbies to proud suburban dads. The Caprice had room for 6, a trunk big enough for 2 weeks of groceries, and a ride so soft it could put you to sleep. But it was not just a cruiser. It had power under the hood and presence on the street. The squared-off lines, stacked headlights, and full chrome bumpers made it look like it was cut from stone. And the sound of its V8 rumble? You could hear it coming down the block. It was a family car, yes, but it had muscle in its bones. Kids rode in the back without seatbelts, bouncing over potholes like it was nothing. Moms drove it to school drop-off. Dads used it for long commutes. And somehow, it never quit. The Caprice Classic was not glamorous, but it was unforgettable. And if you ever rode in one, you remember the way the door shut with a deep, solid thunk. The 1980 Plymouth Horizon and Dodge Omni were once hailed as revolutionary compact hatchbacks. But by the mid-1980s, they were outdated, tired, and barely hanging on. Originally launched in the late 1970s, these cars were based on European platforms and offered front-wheel drive, hatchback practicality, and fuel efficiency just in time for the oil crisis. They were boxy but functional, cheap but clever. But innovation fades fast, and Chrysler failed to evolve the design. By the middle of the decade, the Horizon and Omni were up against more advanced imports from Japan that ran smoother, lasted longer, and offered better interiors. The engines in these compacts buzzed loudly and struggled on hills. Acceleration was sluggish, suspension was rough, and the driving experience felt more like punishment than practicality. Interior plastics cracked, seats wore down fast, the dashboards rattled like old furniture. Chrysler tried to keep them alive with mild facelifts and turbo versions, but it was not enough. Even loyal customers began to move on. Fleet sales kept the nameplates alive, but their reputation as disposable cars only grew stronger. By the time they were finally retired, no one was sad to see them go. They had served their purpose, and then overstayed their welcome. Once trailblazers, now traffic cones. The 1973 Pontiac Ventura GTO is one of the most overlooked muscle cars of the decade, and maybe the most misunderstood. Built during a time when regulations were tightening and insurance premiums were skyrocketing, Pontiac had to get creative, so they took the compact Ventura body and tried to give it the soul of the GTO. On paper, it sounded promising. A small, lighter frame paired with a strong 350 cubic inch V8, dual exhaust, and rally suspension. It even had bold GTO badging, a sport-tuned interior, and a beefy stance. But it arrived in a time when performance was being choked by emissions equipment and rising costs. The Ventura GTO could move, but not like its fire-breathing predecessors. Still, for what it was, it offered a solid package, decent power, good handling, and classic Pontiac design. It had all the styling cues of a proper muscle car, from the hood scoop to the rally wheels. Inside, it had sporty trim, performance gauges, and a feel that was more driver-focused than you would expect from a compact. Unfortunately, the timing just was not right. It could not live up to the GTO nameplate in the eyes of purists, and as a result, it faded into obscurity. But today, that same reputation makes it one of the most unique cars of its time. The Ventura GTO was a final attempt to keep the muscle spirit alive in a changing world, and that deserves respect. The Ford Country Squire Woody wagon was the family car that felt like a rolling vacation home. With its long body, fake wood paneling, and third-row bench that faced backwards, it was more than just transportation, it was an experience. You did not just drive it. You packed it full of cousins, coolers, folding chairs, and half the garage. It had the kind of cargo space that swallowed everything and still had room left over for the dog. The simulated wood trim made it feel fancy in a way only the 1970s could get away with. And for a lot of families, it was the first car you ever rode in. Maybe even the one you learned to drive in. You remember the click of the seatbelts, the hum of the tires on a long road trip, and how your siblings fought over who got the way back seat. It was the car of summer vacations and grocery hauls. The roof racks were always ready. The rear window rolled down with the turn of a key. It creaked a little, it floated over bumps, and it made every trip feel just a little bit special. The Country Squire was comfort, chaos, and childhood all rolled into one. It was the unofficial station wagon of America. And if you grew up in the 1970s, chances are you rode in one, napped in one, or threw up in one. The 1970 Chevrolet Chevelle SS454 was not just a muscle car. It was a factory-built monster that growled with authority the second you touched the gas. At the heart of it was the LS6 engine, a big block brute that delivered 450 horsepower straight off the assembly line. That was unheard of at the time. It was raw, brutal torque packed into a mid-sized body that looked like it was always in motion, even when parked. The dual stripes, the cowl induction hood, and the rumble from those chrome-tipped exhaust pipes made the Chevelle impossible to ignore. It was the kind of car that made your palms sweat just sitting in the driver's seat. Quarter-mile times were legendary, and this car did not care about finesse, it was about dominance. People who drove it felt like kings, and those who lined up next to it at a red light, they usually regretted it. The Chevelle SS 454 was the kind of car you saved all summer to buy, all winter to fix, and never stopped bragging about. It represented the peak of American muscle, before the rules changed and the power faded. Today, it is not just missed, it is worshipped. If these timeless beauties still make your heart race, hit subscribe and tell us which vintage legend you would give anything to drive just once.